Chapter 10 of The Missing Chums by Franklin W. Dixon. This Librivox recording is in the public domain. The Boy on the Deck. Perhaps it was because Mrs. Hardy was determined to show that she was mistress in her own home. At any rate, she gave her consent to the proposed expedition. This was in spite of all Aunt Gertrude's protests and predictions of disaster. The terrible woman raved for an hour when it was definitely decided that the Hardy boys should go on the trip, but Mrs. Hardy was firm. If there was any chance that they might be able to rescue Chet and Biff, she meant that they should avail themselves of it. They explained their theory regarding the letter, and although Aunt Gertrude derided it as nonsense, Mrs. Hardy was disposed to believe that their deductions might be correct. "You may go," she said, "but take care of yourselves and don't take any foolish chances. I'm worrying enough about your father as it is." So the boys left the house before Aunt Gertrude would have an opportunity to change their mother's mind, and joyfully acquainted Phil and Tony with their news. "We're going to start right away," they told their chums. "Better get ready." "I was speaking to Slim Robinson and Jerry Gilroy," Tony told them. "They want to come along too." "There isn't room for all of us in the one boat." "I was thinking of that. What's the matter with the rest of us making the trip in the Napoli? I'll get up another expedition and we'll follow you." "Good idea. One of the boys can come with us and the rest of you can go in the Napoli. Joe and I are starting right away." But when it came time to check up on the various members of the searching party, they discovered that Tony was the only one who could leave that day. Slim Robinson had to work that afternoon, as also had Jerry Gilroy, while Phil Cohen had an engagement for the evening that he was unable to break. "We'll all leave in the Napoli first thing tomorrow morning then," decided Tony. "You and Joe go ahead in your boat now and head toward Black Snake Island. We'll be along in the morning." This was the plan agreed upon, and the Hardy boys lost no time in making ready for the trip. They had the forethought to stock up with provisions for several days, although the run to Black Snake Island would not take them many hours, because they realized that the search might keep them away from home longer than they expected. It was afternoon before they were able to get away, and all through the lunch hour they were in a constant state of apprehension lest Aunt Gertrude prevail upon their mother to withdraw her permission for the journey. "They'll never come back alive, mark my words," declared their aunt. "They'll be bitten by those snakes on Black Snake Island as sure as fate. Why, even grown-up men won't go on that island. It's a terrible place. I've read all about it." "We're not planning to explore the island, Aunt Gertrude," Frank explained. "We're going to cruise around it and see if we can find any sign of the fellows." "Cruise around it," their aunt sniffed. "As if I don't know you boys. You'll not be satisfied until you've tramped from one end of the island to the other. But go ahead. Go ahead. I wash my hands of the affair. If you want to commit suicide, it's your own lookout." And she swept from the room in great indignation. Mrs. Hardy did not share her fears. She knew her sons well enough to realize that they would not run into needless dangers, and when she kissed them good-bye, her only request was that they would not stay away any longer than was necessary. The bay was calm when they started out, and the sleuth was running, as Joe expressed it, like a watch. It was a beautiful summer afternoon, and the cool breeze out on the water was in welcome relief to the sweltering heat of the city streets. Spray flicked into their faces as the motorboat raced along toward the Eastern Gap. When they passed out of Barmet Bay and reached the open sea, Frank headed the boat down the coast in the direction of Black Snake Island. "It isn't far from the coast. There's a channel of a little over a mile," he said to his brother. "We won't be able to make it tonight, but we'll stop over at Rock Harbor and go on again in the morning. By that time, Tony and the others shouldn't be far behind." Toward the end of the afternoon, they were in sight of Rock Harbor, a small port where they spied a schooner at anchor in the distance. Rock Harbor was not a shipping point of great importance, but there were always a number of miscellaneous craft in evidence. To enter the harbor, they were obliged to pass within a short distance of the schooner, swinging about beneath the bows of the vessel. As the sleuth plunged through the water in the very shadow of the ship, Joe suddenly gave an exclamation of surprise. "Frank, look up on deck! Quick!" Frank glanced hurriedly upward. He was just in time to see the figure of a boy moving away from the rail, but there was something familiar about the young fellow that made him look incredulously at his brother. "Chet!" "I'm sure it's him," returned Joe hurriedly. "I didn't get a very good look at his face because he only looked over the rail and then he drew back, but I'm almost positive it was Chet." "But what on earth can he be doing on that schooner?" "Probably he's a prisoner. Let's give him a hail." They shouted the name of their chum half a dozen times, but their only response was from a villainous-looking sailor who glared over the side at them and bade them get away from the ship. "No use causing trouble," said Frank in a low voice. "We'll go now, but we'll come back later." He steered the motorboat away from the vicinity of the schooner, but instead of going on into the harbor, he put out to sea again. "It won't be long until it gets darker. Then we'll go back. If Chet is on that ship, we'll get word to him somehow." "Well, if it isn't Chet Morton, it's his double," declared Joe. "Even if I didn't get a very good look at him, I know he was just about the same height and build and the same general appearance. What puzzles me is why he didn't call out to us, and why did he draw back from the rail in such a hurry? He mustn't have had time to call us. Perhaps he managed to escape just for a minute or so, and they dragged him back before he could give a shout. There's something in that, and of course he mightn't have recognized us. He would have recognized the boat, I'm sure. There's something queer about it. If we come back later on, we may be able to see him again. Did you notice the name of the schooner?" "Yes," answered Frank. "I watched for it. The Persis. I think what we'd better do now is this. We'll go back down the coast and loaf around until it gets darker. Then we'll come back to the harbor and try to come up to the schooner quietly. If there's a rope ladder handy, I'll go up over the side and see what I can find out." "It looks like our only chance. You'll have to go easy. If Chet and Biff are held prisoners on that ship, they'll be well guarded. You might be captured yourself. That's where you will come in. If you hear the sounds of a struggle, or if I don't come back, go right into the harbor and notify the police so they can have the schooner searched." Joe nodded. "All right, I'll keep watch." Frank steered the motorboat back along the coast, and for the next hour or more they cruised about waiting for twilight. At length sunset came, and gradually the shadows fell. Lights began to twinkle in the town. Lights glowed from the mysterious schooner, now but a rakish shadow at the entrance to the harbor. When the lads judged that it was sufficiently dark to cover their approach, they returned, then crept quietly up on the ship. They drew up close to the schooner's stern without being noticed, and, to Frank's relief, he saw that a rope was dangling over the side. From the boat he reached out and seized it. The rope held fast. It supported his weight. There were vague sounds from the deck above, the shuffling of feet, a burst of laughter from forward. Most of the men, he judged, would be in port, but it behooved him to move with caution. "All set," he whispered to Joe. "Right." Frank swung himself away from the motorboat and began to climb slowly to the deck. Water lapped against the schooner's hull. The night was very quiet. Complete darkness had fallen by now. In a few moments Joe could only distinguish his brother as an obscure shadow as he clambered slowly upward. Anxiously Joe Hardy watched. He saw his brother climb higher and higher until at last his head and shoulders were silhouetted above the side of the ship. Then Frank scrambled quietly over onto the deck. He had removed his shoes so as to proceed with a minimum of sound, so that once he had disappeared over the side, Joe could hear nothing. He crouched in the boat, waiting. Finally, he heard a low whistle from the deck above. He looked up. He could see Frank leaning over the side. His brother's face was only a gray blur. He motioned with his arm, indicating that Joe was to follow him. The motorboat had been tied fast, so, although Joe was somewhat puzzled, he was nothing loath to share the adventure. Seizing the rope, he swung himself free of the motorboat, then began to climb nimbly toward the deck. The rope cut into his hands, and the climb taxed his strength, but in a few minutes he was near the top. Frank had moved back from the side into the darkness again. He scrambled over the side and dropped lightly onto the deck. Frank was crouched in the shadows waiting for him, and at that moment a heavy hand fell on his shoulder and a gruff voice said in his ear, "All right, young fellow, now we've got you both." End of chapter 10.